Hello everybody and welcome to the final edition of Ed Puzzle Notes for the 2017-2016 school year. Today we're going to be going over something called the Hardy-Weinberg Principle, or otherwise called Hardy-Weinberg Equilibrium. That just means that allele frequencies, remember alleles are those things like little b for blue eyes and big B for brown eyes, the specific forms of the genes that gives us our traits. That's what alleles are, if you don't remember. So it states that allele frequencies in a population, they will not change unless one or more factors cause them to change. So definitely know that. That is the Hardy-Weinberg principle. And it's also called Hardy-Weinberg Equilibrium. Now know that equilibrium does not mean equal. I mean, in the population, the little b allele in the gene pool, it could be 10%. And the brown-eyed allele, or not blue allele, could be 90%. And if 20 years later, it's still at 10% and still 90%, that is equilibrium because they did not change. They stayed at 10% and 90%. So it does not mean 50-50. It just means they don't change. So that's all it means. When allele frequencies remain constant, that's genetic equilibrium. Now, hopefully by now we should know that in nature this never happens because there's always things that are causing genetic frequencies or the percentage of alleles to change. Some of these things include non-random mating. So no matter what the species of organisms, from lions and bears and humans, it's not random who you mate with. So female lions, they don't just find the weakest male lion, the first one that they find. No, they look for the strongest, most dominant male. Same thing with bears. The females don't just mate with the first bear they see. They look for the most dominant male. So it's not random who mates with who in the wild. Mutations. Anytime you have mutations in a population, that changes genetic equilibrium. It changes the percentage of alleles. Migration. Anytime individuals move in or out of a population, that's going to change the percentage or the frequency of alleles in the population. We should definitely know this one, natural selection. Those are alleles or traits which are beneficial, which help you to survive. Those are going to go up in percentage or frequency. And alleles that don't help you survive, those should go down in percentage in the population. And the last one was genetic drift. That is just allele frequencies or percentages changing, going up or down just due to random chance events. Alright, well I know this is biology, but every now and then I like to throw a little math at you. I know some people are scared of math. Oh, it's scary. Math is scary. No, math is not scary. A lot of you guys are better at math than I am. And if I can do this stuff, I know all of you can do it as well. Anyways. Alright, so here are our two Hardy-Weinberg equations. First, an old British saying, which is, mind your P's and Q's, which basically just means act appropriately, don't act crazy. Anyways, that just kind of reminds you that we're going to use the letters Q and P. Now, if you forget Q and P and you use some other letters, I don't care, as long as you have the right equation. So, regular bios, I might let you use a cheat sheet to allow you to remember these equations. Honors, you're just going to have to remember them, but they're really not that hard. All right, so the first one is P plus Q equals 1. That's about as easy an equation as you can ever have. It's even easier than Einstein's E equals mc squared. P plus Q equals 1. His second one is P squared plus 2PQ, which is 2 times P times Q, plus Q squared also equals 1. Now, this doesn't really mean much unless we know what P and Q are. So, this is what it is. Hopefully, you remember from genetics that you can have several different genotypes. For like, say, brown eyes. Big B is brown eyes. Well, you can be homozygous brown eyes. You can be heterozygous brown eyes. Or you can have blue eyes, which means you're homozygous recessive. Well, that's what we're trying to do with these equations. these Hardy-Weinberg equations can actually allow you to accurately predict the frequency or percentage of genotypes in the population, like say big B or big B little b, and also can allow you to predict accurately the percentage of the alleles in the population. So P, let's start with P. P equals the frequency of the dominant allele in the population. So for this example, it would be what percentage of the population of people have the big B allele? What percentage of the alleles in the whole gene pool is dominant? Q, on the other hand, is what is the frequency of the recessive allele? What's the frequency or the percentage of little b's in the gene pool? Now, P squared equals what percentage or what is the frequency of individuals in the population that are homozygous dominant? So P squared is what percentage of the people are that have brown eyes, but they're also big B. 2PQ is what's the percentage or frequency of individuals who are heterozygous, which means they have brown eyes, but they're big B, little b. And Q squared is what percentage or what's the frequency of individuals who are homozygous recessive. In this case, it would be little b. Okay, so here's a sample problem, a practice for us to do. In a population of 10,000 people, 17% of the people have blue eyes. Now remember, blue eyes is recessive, so that's like little b. And 17% also equals 0.17 using the Hardy-Weinberg equations. So we're going to figure out what is the frequency of the dominant allele. So the frequency of the dominant allele is, hey, what's the percentage of big B's in the population, just the allele? What's the frequency of the recessive alleles in the population? So what percentage of the population has, or in the gene pool, is the little b? How many individuals would be homozygous dominant? So the homozygous dominant, remember, that is P squared. So we're figuring out what percentage of the population is big B. What percentage of the population or the frequency are heterozygous? So what percentage are big B, little b? And what percentage of the population is homozygous recessive or little b? So I'm going to do that on the next page. Alright, so here we go. Here are what all the little variables in the equation stand for. So P equals the percentage of the dominant allele in the gene pool, the big B in this case. Q is the percentage of the recessive allele in the gene pool, the little b, the blue-eyed allele. P squared is what percentage of the population is homozygous dominant, or big B for brown eyes. 2 times P times Q equals what percentage of the population is heterozygous, or big B, little b. And Q squared is what percentage of the population is little b. Now, if you remember in our question, it said that 17% of the people have blue eyes. Well, that tells us everything we need to know. Because the only way you can have blue eyes, remember 17% is the same thing as 0.17. The only way you can have blue eyes, you got to have the genotype of little b. So boom, they just gave us what Q squared was. Q squared equals 0.17 because 17% of the population has blue eyes. Therefore, 17% of the population has the genotype of little b. Well, I know you guys are better at math than me. If you know what Q squared is, how hard is it to find what Q is? Well, just take the square root. Take the square root of Q squared. Take the square root of 0.17, and if you do that, you're going to get 0.41. So now we got Q equals 0.41. Now, the next thing that's really easy to figure out is, since we have the formula of P plus Q equals 1, if Q equals 0.41, what does P have to equal? So, what plus 0.41 will equal 1? Well, the answer to that is 0.59 plus 0.41 will equal 1. So P equals 0.59. Well, how hard is it to figure out what P squared is? Well, obviously, just square 0.59. And if you do that, you will figure out that P squared equals 0.35. So the only thing we're missing is, what is 2 times P times Q? Well, that's easy. The number 2 times P, 0.59, times Q, 0.41, and that's going to give you 0.48. And if you don't believe me, all you got to do is remember the old formula of P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared equals 1. We'll just add it up. 0.48 plus 0.35 plus 0.41. If you add those all up, it equals 1. Alright, so just in case you couldn't read what I was scribbling on the last page, this is kind of what I did. If the blue-eyed population, that equals Q squared, because Q squared equals the percentage of people that are little b, and that's the only way you have the recessive trait of blue eyes is little b. And if that is 17%, that is the exact same thing as 0.17. So all you got to do is to find, so if Q squared equals 0.17, to find Q, just take the square root of 0.17 and you get 0.41. Then the next step is, since you have Q, use this simple formula of P plus Q equals 1. If Q equals 0.41, right here, P plus 0.41 equals 1. That is about as simple of algebra as you can get. P has to equal 0.59, because 0.59 plus 0.41 equals 1. And now that you know what P is, just square it. To find P squared, you square 0.59, and you get 0.35. And then, once again, to find 2PQ, just multiply 2 times P times Q, and you get 0.48. And this shows you that if you just add them all up, 0.35, P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared, you will get 1. Now, this is the percentages. Now, if you remember, in the original question it said how many people would have these genotypes. Well, the original question said that there was 10,000 people in the population. So 35% of 10,000 people would be 3,500. 48% of 10,000 people would be 4,800. And 17% of that population of 10,000 people would be 1,700. And there you go. All right, so now I'll try another one. Here we got dimples is dominant, big D. No dimples, having no dimples is a recessive trait, that's little d. Here we have 20% of the population has dimples. So we're going to try to figure out what P equals, Q equals, P squared, Q squared, and 2 times P times Q. Alright, so 20% of the population has dimples. So 20% of the population has the genotype of big D, or big D, little d. That means 80% of the population that has no dimples, they have to have the genotype of little d. Well, there you go. Q squared equals the percentage of individuals that are homozygous recessive. So we just figured out what Q squared is. Q squared equals 0.80. 0.80, that's Q squared. Now to figure out Q, that's pretty easy. If Q squared equals 0.8 or 0.80, just take the square root. If you take the square root of 0.80, you will find out that Q equals 0.89. Because 0.89 is the square root of 0.80. Now that we know what Q is, if Q equals 0.89, now we use P plus Q equals 1. If Q equals 0.89, that means that P has to equal 0.11, because 0.11 plus 0.89 will equal 1. Now, obviously, to figure out, the next thing we're going to figure out is p squared. So all you got to do is if p equals 0.11, just square them. Square 0.11. If you do that, p squared, 0.11 squared equals 0.01. Now all we got to do is figure out what's 2 times p times q. And any of us that have a calculator or a cell phone, we could easily do what's 2 times p times q. So it's 2 times 0.11 times 0.89. And if you do those, you'll get that 2 times p times q equals 0.19. So we figured out everything. So we figured out that 80% of the population is q squared, which means little d, little d. So little d, genotype equals 80%. 2pq, that's the percentage of individuals that are heterozygous, big D, little d, and that equals 0.19 or 19%. And homozygous dominant, that's p squared. And we figured out that that is right here. The percentage of people in that population that are big D for dimples is about 1% of the population. And if you add all these up, once again, I've rounded off these numbers, so sometimes it's not perfect, but this time it is. It is equal to 1. Now, the other thing we figured out is what is the percentage of the big D or the dimple allele in the population? Well, that will be what is P. Well, P equals, the percentages is 0.11 over here, so that's 11% of the alleles in the gene pool is going to be dominant. So obviously, the little d is going to be 89% of the alleles in that gene pool are going to be recessive. All right, so like always, it is now time for you guys to try one. So in this case, we're going to have the ability to roll your tongue, which is genetic. You don't have to practice rolling your tongue. It's in your genes. So rolling your tongue is dominant. If you can roll your tongue like into kind of like a taco. And if you cannot roll your tongue, that is recessive. And in this case, I just totally made this up, so don't go tell everybody that 85% of the people can roll your tongue, because I don't know what the percentage is. But we're going to say 85% of the population can roll their tongue. So since rolling your tongue is dominant, 85% of the population has a genotype of big R, or big R, little r. Now the questions I'm going to give you, and you're going to probably need some paper to figure this out. Can you guys figure out what all of these variables are? Now remember the equations. P plus Q equals 1. Q squared plus 2PQ plus P squared also equals 1. And we'll see if you get it right, and then I'll show you how to do it one more time. All right, so the problem gave us that 85% of the population can roll their tongue. So they're big R, or big R, little r. That means 15% or 0.15 cannot roll their tongue. Well, the only way they cannot roll their tongue is they got to have the genotype of little r. Well, that's what Q squared is. Q squared is what's the percentage or the frequency of homozygous recessive. So we just figured out what Q squared is. It equals 0.15. All right, well, to figure out what Q is, that's very easy. Since Q squared is 0.15, all you got to do is take the square root of 0.15. And if you do that, the square root of 0.15 will equal 0.39. All right, so now we know that Q equals 0.39. We also have the old formula of P plus Q equals 1. Well, if Q equals 0.39, what plus 0.39 will equal 1? Well, the answer to that is obviously 0.61, because 0.61 plus 0.39 will equal 1. So the next question is, what is P squared? Well, if P equals 0.61, all you got to do is hit your little squared button on your calculator, and 0.61 squared will give you 0.37. And the last thing we got to figure out, 2PQ, that figures out what percentage of the population is heterozygous, or big R, little r. Well, 2 times P times Q. If you use your calculator, 2 times P times Q will give you 0.48. All right, there you have it. Thank you very much for listening, not only for this Ed puzzle, but for the entire year of Ed puzzles and Nearpods and all the other junk that I threw at you. I really appreciate your attention. If you have any problems with this, feel free to let me know, and we can help you out. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.